Beginning the current Daf Eruvin Daf we'll begin 12 lines down at the top of the Yomik, where we continue with the next Mishnah, continuing on a similar theme what we spoke about up until now. Up until now, at this point of the paragraph, we spoke about base and passing. We spoke about inferior types of walls, where you really have just 4 double posts at the corners, because we made that leniency with the Eiler Golem, the pilgrimages, that they could have that pit of water for the animals. Now we're going to speak about a related halacha that known as karfa. Today's daf. Some of the things we can speak about today's daf that we discussed in the previous daf are karfif, which is an enclosed area. It's not really for residential purposes, or it might be, but it's not really where there's a house. There's what exactly it is. Does it have to be square? Could it also be rectangular? And also, if it could be rectangular, actually, what proportion could it be? There's going to be a few different machlokes in this definition. Then we're going to have some chidushin that Rabbi Yomי heard from Rabbi Lazar, which we're going to explain on later daf. The source for the maximum size of a karfif, which again is limited, it's not like a regular Rosh Hashanah, it's like a garden, a park. These are things that they're enclosed areas, but they're not just like a regular Rosh Hashanah. What's the maximum size? A karfif, then the Gemara ends up with an interesting case that we'll discuss more on the next daf. A karfif that was designated for living purposes, so it was what's called hukaf ladira. Then major parts were planted with vegetables or trees. What happens to the karfif in that situation? Does it maybe lose its status as it become a more stringent area? And one of the key terms and concepts is this idea that we're going to be discussing is what's called a karfif, which is an enclosed area, shaloi hukav ladira, but it wasn't for living purposes. One may not carry there if it's larger than Beis Hasayim, but if it is for regular dira, we'll see exactly, even if there is an opinion that possibly it's still you're limited to an area basis. To begin the current daf with the Mishnah, 12 lines down at the top of the Yomik, which the Mishnah says like this: Va'id Amr b'Yudim B'Av. And the Gemara is going to explain what's the Va'id, where's he coming from? We're starting a new topic over here. What's the Va'id? But also Rabbi Yudim B'Av says the following teaching. He says Hagina v'Hakarfaf, a garden or an enclosed area. And what we're going to have over here, machlekes in this karfif. There's actually more than one machlekes in this Mishnah regarding what it needs in order to be able to carry it. So first we explain what the dimensions are of what we're discussing over here. If the garden or the enclosed area, a park, whatever you want to look at, the karfif, it's 70 amas and a fraction. Al ayin amma b'shirayim, by 70 amas and a fraction. Hamukefes gedru gavaya sar tefachim. So it's surrounded with a regular wall that's 10 tefachim high. So halacha is, if it has 70 plus amas or less, so then you can carry inside this area. Now, that's the dimensions of the karfif. Now we're going to have a machlekes regarding a 3-way machlekes. What are the requirements that it needs to have to be able to carry in that area? So again, it can't be more than base design, but even so, the question is, what else does it need? So the first opinion, this is Rabbi Yudim B'Av that we're talking about over here, he says, but it has to have, let's say, the hut for the watchman. So as Rashi explains, that even though, and this is Rabbi Yudim B'Av, that it is hukav ladira. This is how Rashi explains this opinion. It is surrounded it's enclosed for residential purposes because the watchman lives over there. Even so, it's not a regular house. Even so, it's only led for an area of 2 sa and not anything more. Oy beis diro, or even a house where someone lives in, oy shtei smuch li'ir, or that it's close to the city. Since it's close to the person's house, already, again, it's also that he's going to constantly be using it, like a garage or whatever. So then it's considered like enclosed for residential purposes. And even so, it's only going to be, if it's smaller base of sign, then it must be hukav ladira. Larger base of sign, even if it's hukav ladira, Rashi explains that it's going to be asr more than that. So again, even though it has to have a hukav ladira, still it's not going to be allowed to be if it's bigger than that. That was Rabbi Yudim B'Av. Yudami says, no, even if it only has a pit, the sheikh or a ditch, or ma'ara or a cave, so he holds similar to Yudam B'Av, but he holds it doesn't need to make it into like a residential area more than that. It could have even things that are more inferior, like a bar, a ditch, a cave. All those things are going to function to make it into a permitted area to carry it over there. He's the most lenient of them all. He says, he says, no, even if it doesn't have any other things that the 2 other opinions mentioned, but you could carry inside of it. As long as you don't have more than 70 amas squared, then it's going to be permitted, because he holds it doesn't need to be hukav ladira. It could be just a park, a garden, whatever it is. If it's not more than base design, it's going to be permitted to carry in that area. So I was going to ask that the Rabbi Kiva similarly is like the Tanakh, which is a machlekes showing who the Tanakh is. either it's Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg, but the way Rashi explains it's from a previous Mishnah. Tanakama also said the same thing. That you limit to that area. So again, a little bit complicated, but we're speaking about so far a karfif. The question is, this karfif, there's not more than what's called basis sign, which you could plant 2 saw worth of seeds, which is basically 70 amas and a little bit more squared. That's the dimensions we're talking about. Question is, the 3 machlekes regarding what does that require, besides that not being more than that area, to light a carry over there. Either that has to be really enclosed for residential purposes. You gotta have a guard that lives over there, or some type of house, or it's near where you live, so it's for considered residential purposes. Or you don't need to have a regular house, you don't have a shameh, but you gotta have something like a pit or whatever. Or Rabbi Kiva says you don't have to have anything, it doesn't have to be hukah l'dira. Even if it's not hukah l'dira, the carve is gonna be permitted if it's not more than base aside. That's where we are so far. Now, then we have another machlekes in this halacha of the Mishnah, which is the actual shape of this karfif shel hukah l'dira. Rabbi Eliezer, he says, if the length was more than the width, afila ama achas, meaning it's not a perfect square, if it's even more the length, more than the width, even by 1 amma. So even though, let's say, you're not going to have more than base aside, because you'll make the, let's say, the width a little bit less, and then you'll add a little more to the length, so you won't have more than the allowed measurement that we spoke about. Still, still you're not allowed to carry inside, because the way the Gemara, at least in the Havamina, understands, because the Gemara ends up amending this part of the Mishnah, the Rabbanan only permitted if it's going to be totally squared. If it was not enclosed if it was not enclosed for residential purposes, you're not allowed. It has to be perfectly square. We'll see in the Gemara why would that be, but it has to be perfectly square. If the length is 1 more amma than the width, it's not going to be valid. That's the first opinion. Rabbi Yisam, he says no. He says actually, even if the length is double the amount of the width, then it's going to be allowed to be metal l'mataycha. You're allowed to go ahead and carry inside of it. Now, that was 2 opinions. Rabbi he says, Shemati Rabbi Lazar, he says, I heard from Rabbi Lazar, Philly could base kur. He says, even if it's, and this is coming to disagree with the first opinions we mentioned in the Mishnah, how long, how big we're letting this to be. He says, even if it's as big as a base kur, forget about base design. Again, a saw is a measurement of food. How much could you plant? He says, base design, you can plant even if it's a kur, which is much larger. So he's disagreeing with all those first opinions in the beginning of the Mishnah. Now, then he says also, parenthetically, I also heard, Rabbi Eliezer saying, this is what I heard from Rabbi Lazar. I heard 2 other things. First of all, the halacha we'll learn later on this Masechta Anshe Chatzar. People in a courtyard, which again, we spoke about people in the courtyard, they want to be able to carry in the courtyard, all the houses, they have to make what's called a Eruvin Daf. So he says that the people in the courtyard, one guy, this guy in Nabucco, you always have that one guy, he didn't make the Eruv. So now he's making the whole, no one can carry now because he's not part of the Eruv. So tomorrow on Shabbos he realizes, I forgot to join the Eruv. So he does what's called Beetle. He's Mavatar, nullifies his domain, because up until he does that, he makes it forbidden for anyone to carry from the house to the courtyard. So the halacha actually becomes, Beisei Asam Lahachnes Ulahaiti Loi. His house, he cannot carry out from his own house to the courtyard, or to bring in from the courtyard into his house for his own needs, because he was Mavatar his Rishos, like as if he doesn't own his house anymore. Because if he did, he would be another owner over here. It wouldn't be a singular owned property by the whole community. But for them, it's going to be permitted for them to carry out their vessels from his house or to his house through the courtyard. Which that's the chiddush that Rabbi says he heard from Rabbi. The other opinions disagree with that, saying that no one could use his house. But again, that's halacha that he was also saying he heard from Rabbi. And the third one is, also what I heard from him is, our kablim, that you could fulfill your obligation for mar with our krablim, which are a certain type of vine from the date palm, but Pesach, that also qualifies for mar because it's bitter. But he says, regarding all these 3 halachas that I heard from Rabbi Lazar, I went around to all his students, I was looking for a colleague. For all these 3 halachas, did they hear the same thing from our Rabbi Lazar? I didn't find anyone that agreed with me. And the Gemara explains, by all 3 halachas, they disagree with him. Regarding the halacha of the garden and the karfif, no, they don't permit if it's more than base aside. He was saying there, Rabbi Lazar said, it could be even the base core. No one says, unlike, everyone agreed to the beginning of our Mishnah, that you're limited to A or B and A or base aside. Regarding his second halacha that he said he heard regarding the people in the courtyard, they hold that no, even they're not allowed to carry out from his house. But from the other people's houses, the courtyard, that's permitted. And the Gemara is going to explain what the machlekes is. And regarding the third one, of the Arkaplin, they also hold that, no, that's not mar. So there were all 3 halachas that he was saying he heard from the Rebbe. No one said they heard like that. They all disagree with him. Now the Gemara says, a question on the diktuk of the Mishnah. My Tana, what exactly was Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava teaching regarding the garden or the karfif, an enclosed area previously? The Mishnah opens up by saying, And also, Eruvin Daf says, it sounds like that he said another stringency regarding Gina V'Karfim, besides the one that he's saying in our Mishnah, that you have to have it enclosed for residential purposes to allow it to be this base assigned to be able to carry inside of it. Where do you find that he said another halacha in the previous Mishnah? And we know he didn't say anything like that. We just started the topic actually right now. So, and if the reason is because you're right, he didn't say another thing regarding Gina V'Karfim. It's just that he already had said a previous stringency regarding the laws of Pasim, regarding the boards of the wells, where he had said that you're only allowed to make it regarding, this was the previous Mishnah we had just right before, which we did this in the previous Daf, on the bottom of the Amid, that he said that you're only allowed to make it for Be'er Harab Mulad. We had a machlekes regarding what type of wells did we allow you to make these inferior walls of these L-shaped brackets on the corners. He said it has to be a well of spring water, and it also has to be that it's owned by the rabbi. So that's a stringency that he was saying. And therefore, and now he's saying another stringency here regarding the laws of Karfur, that although it's enclosed for residential purposes, still it's not going to be permitted more than one of the bases I am. And that's what I'm saying also. Besides our stringency in one halacha, I'm saying another halacha, but says the Gemara about Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, the Tanei Lechad L'Chumra, he also was quoted as saying a stringency in the previous Mishnah. He said regarding the Pasi Berais that he said it's only permitted up until base assigned, and not more. The Chum disagreed. They say, no, it could be as big as you want it to be. He says, no, it's only a little bit up until base assigned. And he also says another stringency regarding the Pasi Berais, that if the public is walking through where the boards are in through the area of the well, he said you have to divert them to the side. You can't have them walk through because and we didn't say over there, and also. Why didn't we say, and also, if we already said one stringency? Obviously, because it's not on the same topic. It's not the same halacha. Why isn't it the same topic? Aren't they both Pasi Berais? So Rashi explains no, because the first halacha was talking about the measurement of the perimeter of the hekev of the Pasi. The second halacha was talking about the nullification of the walls. So although the topic, the subject matter was the same Pasi, but they're different halachas. One talking about how big could the perimeter be, and the other one was regarding the halacha that Rab come and the Mevat Lechitzas. So obviously, and that's even in the same subject matter, but since it's not the same exact halacha, you don't say va'oid. So then we're back to the question: how could you say by Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava va'oid? Oh, my Rabbi, what do you mean va'oid? Va'oid what? What? Because you said one halacha stringency in a Pasi Berais, you're going to say another one regarding the halacha of Karfaf that you say va'oid, but then Rabbi Yehuda also should have said va'oid. Says well, no. Truth is, we will say va'oid if you said in one context and then another context we'll say va'oid. Hasam of Rabbi Yehuda sekur rabbanon. The Rabbanan, who disagreed with him, they interrupted his statements. Because Amrullah, the Mishnah had said, no, they didn't say Besasayim for this halacha of Pasim. They said only for Gin, the Vakarf, all those things that they said Besasayim. So since they interrupted him, we cannot say Va'oid. Well, what? Someone else already got up onto the podium. You can't say Va'oid anymore. If you look, it was the last Mishnah, Yehuda ben Bava was the last one to talk. The next Mishnah is Va'oid. So therefore, since no one interrupted, we can say Va'oid even though it's a different halacha. Says the Gemara, so wait a second. What you're telling me, wherever the Rabbanan, someone else got up to speak, that's why we don't say Va'oid. If you would be able to, like for example, that if it was the same type of halacha, then you would say Va'oid, but Rabbi Lazar the Sukkah, Rabbi Lazar in the Sef the Sukkah, on Daf Chav Zayin Ben Aleph, there's a Mishnah over there, Rabbi Lazar says that a person is obligated to eat 14 meals on Sukkot. Every day he has to eat 2 meals. So Chum say, no, there's no set amount. Then it says, Va'oidam Rabbi Lazar. Someone that did not eat the first night of Yom Tov, he has to supplement that and complete it on the last night of Yom Tov. So obviously you see that the Reish and the Sefer is talking about the Sudas of Sukkot and regarding how many you have to eat. And it says, Va'oid. But the problem is, over there, Rabbi Lazar by Sukkot, have Sekur Rabbanan. The Rabbanan get in the middle, and B'Ktani Va'oid, and still we say Va'oid. Even though the Rabbanan said a disagreement, and they said there's no set amount. Obviously, that then we're back to the question. Obviously, why did by Rabbi Yehuda we not say Va'oid? Can't be because Rabban interrupted. Because Rabbi Lazar and Sukkah, the Rabban interrupted and said Amrullah, and still you say Va'oid? Obviously, it has to be because it's not the same halacha. So back to the question. Read Ben Bava, how can you say Va'oid if it's not the same halacha? One is regarding the Pas and one's regarding Karfur. The Rosh Gemara says, no, it's not a good question. Hasam over there by Rabbi Lazar, by the laws of Sukkah, the Milsehu Daf Sekur. When the Rabbanan responded to him, they were only talking to him in what he himself had said. He was telling them how many meals you have to eat, and they were saying, no, we disagree how many meals you have to eat. So since it was still him, he was still talking, they were just rebutting him on what he was talking about, he could continue saying what he wanted to say. Over here, Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah, they're interrupting with something else that he didn't talk about, because he was talking about Pasi Beros, which was the content of all the previous Mashanais up until now in this parak. And he was saying, you limit up till Beis Hasayim. And what did Rabbanan respond to him? They said, no, we didn't say Beis Hasayim in the laws of Pasi. We said only by the halachas of Dir, Sar, all these different Begina, Karf, all those different halachas. So they started talking about something else. Because they were saying you're wrong in saying based on this context. It's only in that context. So truthfully is, yes, the reason why Rabbi Yehuda, why we didn't say V'la'id, is because Rabbanan interrupted. Where there's no interruption, because no one says anything to him in the middle, you could say V'la'id, even though it's not the same content, you could still say V'la'id because it's another stringency. Rabbi Lazar, although they interrupted, but it was in the same idea that he was talking about, so you could continue saying V'la'id. Rabbi Yehuda, they interrupted him with something else. And therefore, you can't continue saying V'la'id. So that's why it doesn't say V'la'id Rabbi Yehuda, but it does say V'la'id over here, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. Seems like something, a technicality, but you see the Gemara puts in that, it says why does it say the word V'la'id? We have in the Mishnah, Rabbi Kiva Oimi, he said, Afila ein ba echad mikol elu. We had a machlekes, as we said, regarding this halacha of the karfaf, that was 70 plus amas. We had a machlekes, what else it needs in order to carry it. Read above it, we said it says it's got to be a watchman's booth, it's got to get something, it's got to be hook of the deer. Rabbi Yehuda that says, okay, you don't have to have a house, but you have some type of a pit. Rabbi Kiva that says it doesn't need anything, it doesn't have to be hook of the deer. If it's not larger than 70 plus by 70 plus amas, it's going to be okay. You could go ahead and carry inside of it. Now, the Gemara continues on the base and says, wait a second. Rabbi Kiva, I know Tanakama. Rabbi Kiva is essentially the same as the Tanakama. It's not like Rashi takes who we mean Tanakama, but Rashi says it's on Daf Yitchesem at Aleph. That previous Mishnah, which Amru Loivi said to Rabbi Yehuda, they said no, they didn't say Beis Hasayim in what you're talking about of Pasi Berois of the boards around the wells. No, the boards around the wells you can make the area as big as you want them. They only said if a Gina and Karfas. That over there, then it's going to be limited to Beis Hasayim. But obviously, that where there's a base dira, then you can make it as big as you want. It's when it's shloi hukaf l'dira, if it wasn't surrounded for residential purposes, so then that's where we're going to tell you a Beis Hasayim is what you're limited to, and that's the same thing like Rabbi Kiva. So what Rabbi Kiva is saying more than what we had in the Tanakama from a previous Mishnah that told you that the area of a karfa, even though it's surrounded for non-residential purposes, that's limited to Beis Hasayim. Beis Hasayim is the same thing as 70 plus amas squared. So the difference between them is a very little bit, because Beis Hasayim, Beis Hasayim again is a saw of seeds that you could plant, however much big that area is, as we'll see in the Gemara. That's a little bit more than 70 amas with a little bit more squared, which is what Rabbi Kiva had said, as the Gemara is going to bring later on. According to Tanakama, you're allowed to do a complete base, up to a full Beis Hasayim. According to Rabbi Kiva, no, you're only allowed to get 70 amas and a little bit more squared, and nothing more, as he explicitly says. So it's up to a bit less than the Beis Hasayim. That's going to be different between Rabbi Kiva and our Mishnah and the Tanakama from a previous Mishnah. Where do we find? It's the Tanakh learned the Brisa. He says, there's something very little, al shiva amma b'shirayim, that's a little bit more than 70 amas and a bit squared, which Gemara is going to shortly explain. The sages did not say explicitly what that measurement is. Now, first the Gemara explains, the kama shir sasai. Now, how much is the measurement of 2 sa, which according to Rabbanan, which is a little bit more than the Kiva? It's kachatzar Mishkan, it's like the courtyard of the Mishkan, which was 5,000 amas squared. That's how much is the exact Beis Hasayim. Which the Gemara says, how do we know this? That you have to square, that we square the chatzar of the Mishkan to evaluate, and again, we said there's opinion, as we said in the Mishnah, that has to be exactly a square. Where do we get this idea from? A, of the dimensions and of the squaring off. We get this all from the Chatzar Mishkan, the courtyard of the Mishkan, to evaluate the Isra of Shabbos regarding the halach of Karfa. As the Gemara explains. Omar Rabbi Yehuda, the Omakra, the Pasuk says in Shemais, and it talks about the dimensions of the Chatzar of the Mishkan, which are the courtyard around the Mishkan. It says, Ayr Chatzar, the length of the courtyard was Me'ah ba'am, was 100 amas in the length, and the width was Chamishim b'Chamishim. The width was 50 by 50. Now, as Rashi explains the Gemara's question, wait a second, what's by 50? Chamishim b'Chamishim? The width was 50 amas and the length was 100. And that's how it says the measurement by, when it talks about the curtains, it says on the northern side, the curtains were 100 in the length. And then the width of the courtyard by the east, it was 50 amas. So what's Chamishim b'Chamishim? What's 50 by 50? What do you mean? What's 50 by 50? It's not 50 by 50, it's 50 by 100. So Amr Torah, that's what the Gemara explains. The Torah tells you, you know what you should do? It's a little bit complicated, this cheshbon. I'm going to go through it, but it's Rashi. He says, Tul Chamishim. What you should do is take 50, which the length is more than the width, V'saviv Chamishim, and go around the remaining 50. So what essentially what the Gemara is saying, what we're learning out from here is, what do you mean Chamishim b'Chamishim? Chamishim b'Chamishim is telling you like this. And yes, the length is 100 by 50. It's telling you, this is 50, and take the 50 by the 50, which essentially wants to say, wrap around this area of 50s, and that take the 50 by 50 and take the other 50 and wrap it around the other 50. I'll explain in Rashi. Essentially, you're going to get to 70 amas and 4 tefachim squared. How so? So Rashi describes like this. He says, take from this 50, let's leave this 50. Again, it's 100 by 50. So let's take this 50. Let's take it cut into 5 strips. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're cutting it into 5 strips. Each one has 10 amas in its width and it has a length of 50. Now, take one and put it on the east. Take one and put it on the west. Now you have, if you're taking one on the east and one on the west, now you have an area of 70 by 50. Take another one, put on the south, put another one, put on the north. Now you have 70 by 70, because you took these 4 strips and you put it on basically all 4 sides. You just add on to the dimensions. Now you have 70 by 70. Now the problem is, and these pictures are not going to be perfect, but I'll use this to show what we really have over here, is that the corners, you're missing the corners, right? If you're adding on over here, you're going to be missing the corners because you're adding on the strips that take you, you're not going to be filling up the exact corners. So each corner is missing a square of 10 by 10. So what you do is you take from the last strip, which we didn't use yet, you take 4 of the 5 boxes, and which are each 10 by 10. You put them on the 4 corners of what you added on, which you're going to be filling up the corners. Now you're left just with 1 strip of 10 by 10 amas. That's what you're left with. Right? Everyone with me so far? Again, you took each one of these strips, you put around the corners, but you didn't fill up the corners. Right? It's because you're adding on this and this. You have this corner, and this corner, and this corner, and this corner. But then you took each one of these 4 boxes, and that filled up the holes of the corners. Now you're left with 1 more box, which is 10 amas squared. Now, what's 10 amas squared? So that's 60 tefachim by 60 tefachim, because each amma is 6 tefachim times 10. So this is 60 tefachim squared. Now what you're going to make is you're going to make 30 strips of 2 tefachim width, and each one is going to have a length of 10 amas, because it still has that dimension of 10 amas. You're making of 2 tefachim. So that's a sum total of 300 amas in the length. So you're going to put 70 on each side. So you're going to take that small, you're going to cut into these thin strips of 2 tefachim. You're going to go all the way around, and you're going to have now 70 amas and 4 tefachim, because you have 2 plus 2 on each side. So you're going to have, not only you have 70 by 70, you're going to have 70 amas plus 4 tefachim by 70 amas and 4 tefachim, which that uses up 280 amas. The problem is, now again you have the corners that are missing 2 tefachim squared, because again, anytime you're adding on, you're going to be missing the corners. So now you're left with 20 amas. So you take 8 tefachim, which is a 4 of the tefachayim, and you put them in the corners, and it fills it up. Now you're left with 18 amas and 4 tefachim by a width of 2 tefachim, again, because we cut into strips of 2 tefachim. So that's the davar mu'at. That's the davar mu'at that's between the Bekiva and the Tanna Kama. Because if you're going to take that little bit that you have left, and you're going to splice it up, and you can use it to surround the perimeter of that whole area, that addition is going to come to a width. It's not going to even come to 2/3 of a finger breadth. Because if you're going to want to make a strip of 282 amas and 4 tefachim in the length, because you have to take a strip that's long enough to go around all 4 sides, it's not going to be even 2/3 of a finger breadth. That's the difference of the davar mu'at between the Tanna Kama and Rebbe Kiva. So now we went through that cheshbon, whether you got it up, but you got the main idea. You could go through the actual mathematics when you have time, and you'll see that that's the measurement that it comes out to. That's the difference between the Kiva and the Tanna Kama. So that was their machlokes. So now the Gemara just asked, interestingly, Pashte Dikra, but the simple translation of the pasuk regarding the Mishnah, the Mike Siv. Okay, you told me the midrashic interpretation that it means take 50 by 50. Really, it's not. Really, the length is 100 and the width is 50. So what's chamishim b'chamishim in the simple translation of the Pashup Shad, how to translate the pasuk when you're teaching Kindlech, how to learn what's b'chamishim of the pasuk. So Mabai says, you know what it really means? Hamid Mishkan, put the Mishkan, which is this, the tabernacle, put the Mishkan al svas chamishim, by the end of where the 50 amas of the courtyard that you come into, where that ends, so that kadeshi chamishim amma, so you have 50 amas of the courtyard in front of the Mishkan, so that'll be chamishim b'chamishim, means to say, imagine if this is, let's say, where the Mishkan is, because they're in the inner 50 amas, the first 50 amas are going to be chamishim b'chamishim, it's going to be 50 amas squared, that's going to be empty. If you look at the picture over here, the Mishkan only starts after 50 amas. That's going to be in the front, it's going to be a 50 amas squared. The esrim amal chol ruach v'ruach, and you're also going to have 20 amas on each side. So Rashi here also seems to go on a little bit of a lengthy explanation, where he says the Mishkan, its length was 30 amas, like the pasuk says in Shemais Chavav. How do you know its length was 30 amas? Because it says it was esrim krashim, 20 of the beams, and the width of each kerish, which was an am and a half. So you take an am and a half times 20, that gives you 30 amas. Now the width of the Mishkan took up 10 amas. How do we know that? Because there was shisha krashim going in the width, which that's 9 amas. And then additionally, a little bit more complicated is that you have the 2 corner krashim, which in the sum total, since each one was an am and a half, are 3 amas in the width, but an amma on each side has to cover the width of the krashim on the sides. So then you really have only half a amma on one side, half a amma on the other side, that then supplements the 9 amas to be into 10 amas. Some people love metrics, some people don't, so just bear with me. But that's what Rashi is going through. He explains. He says, so when you put at the end of 50 amas, the Mishkan, so in the middle of the width of the chutzner, you can have in the front 50 by 50 squared of the chutzner. Then you have 20 amas on all 3 sides of the Mishkan in the inner 50 amas. It's just that the width of the krashim diminishes 1 am on each side, but Rashi explains here we're counting the airspace, and that the width of the walls actually, the airspace of the inner part of the Mishkan. The walls of the thickness of the walls themselves are actually part of the 20 amas on each side. And again, but in front, on the eastern part, there were no krashim, rather there's only curtains, and therefore that's not part of the chesed at all. But again, that was what the Pashup Shah and the Pasuk means when we say 50 by 50, it means that the front part was 50 by 50, that was empty, there was no Mishkan over there. Now the Gemara continues to explain Allah in the Mishnah. Rabbi Shloimy, he says, the first half of the Mishnah was talking about what are the requirements to have regarding the hukaf part of the area of this karfev. Does it have to have for residential purposes or not residential purposes? The second half of the Mishnah was talking about the dimensions of it. Rabbi Shloimy, he says, he says, if the length was more than the width, even 1 amma, so then it's going to be asr. So now the Gemara explains that actually it's not that case, because Vatanu learned the Brisa. This same Rabbi Shloimy, he says, but if the length was more than double of the width, more than 1 amma, you're not allowed to carry inside of it, because that's really like what the chutzah of the Mishkan was, which that was permitted in, it was essentially a karfim because it wasn't for residential purposes. And even though it wasn't squared, we find that the length was double of the width, because we said that the length was 100 amas by 50 amas. So you see, yeah, it can't be more than double, but if it's not more than double, then it's going to be permitted, and that's what Rabbi says. So that contradicts what he says in the Mishnah. And the Mishnah says it has to be squared. It can't be more than 1 amma, more than the width. And here he's saying it can't be more than double. So the Gemara says, Amar Bibi Barbai, he says, you're right. When we learned Rabbi in the Mishnah, it wasn't 1 amma more than the width. It was yes al pishnai barach b'tam. Really should say it can't be more than 1 amma more than double of the width. Says Gemara, that's the case. Rabbi Yasi. That's Rabbi Yasi. The machlekes in the Mishnah was Rabbi Yasi said that the length could be even double of the width, and Rabbi Lezer says no, it can't be more than 1 amma more than the width. But now Rabbi Yasi and Rabbi Lezer are saying the same thing. Says the difference between them is ribua, the squaring, the ribu rabbanan, the rabbanan squared. The Rashi translates, places has a different interpretation. Rabbi Lezer holds that the length could be if the length is more than double of the width. That's what he said in the brisa. Then you can't carry. But the primary dimensions could be that the length is double of the width, and actually that's how it should be, because that's how the pasuk we would learn it out from. Where do we learn it out from? The chutzner of the Mishkan. Chutzner of the Mishkan, the karfef, which was the enclosed area of the chutzner, was double. So that's actually primarily we want the basis sign, which is the measurement we learned from the chutzner of the Mishkan, to be rectangular, meaning to be double the length of the width. And he doesn't hold the halacha of that it has to be squared. But Rashi explains, if you would make it squared, he wouldn't say it's going to be forbidden, because he says if the length was double of the width, then if it's more than that, then you can't carry. But it sounds like if it's less than that, no matter what the dimensions are, then you would be able to carry over there. But again, initially, the Rebbe Loza holds that we want it to be to a ratio of 2.1. But Risi holds that no, primarily we want it to be squared. And that's how we originally ruled. But he also agrees halacha, and that's what Taisa finds difficult in the way Rashi is saying it, that even if it will be double, it's going to be permitted, as he said. But from the fact that he says afilim, even if it's double, but not more than double, sounds like primarily we don't want it to be double. We want it to be squared. And it should be 70 plus by 70 plus. That's the difference between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Elazar. In the Mishnah, that everyone agrees it could be 2.1, everyone agrees it could be squared. But the way Rashi is translating is what primarily do we want? Rabbi Elazar primarily wants it to be 2.1 like it was in the Mishkan. But what Rabbi Yossi says, no, primarily we want it to be that it should be squared. It should be 70 amas squared. That's the machlekes. According to Rabbi Elazar, no preference. Rabbi Yossi holds that the kechila should be squared. Now, in the Mishnah, we had Rabbi Yossi that we just quoted right now, that he said that it could be up until it doesn't have to be squared. It could be although he said actually he was the one that says like a tefillah we want it to be squared, but it doesn't have to be squared. It could be up until double. The length could be double of the width. So we learned he says halacha Rabbi Yossi that it doesn't have to be squared. Again, he holds like a tefillah should be, unlike Rabbi Elazar, but it doesn't have to be squared. It could be up until double of the width, which again could mean it could be rectangular. Rectangular karfif is fine. And Rav Bibi Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, another Amar says in the name of Shmuel, halacha like Rabbi Kiva, halacha like Rabbi Kiva, who we also mentioned in the Mishnah, it doesn't require by the heter of the karfef up until Sasayim, it doesn't have to be surrounded for residential purposes. It could be like a park, it could be like a garden, it could be something that, unlike the two other pins required, something there, a watchman's hut or a pit or something. Like Rabbi Kiva, a karfif doesn't need anything. If it's up until Beis Hasayim, it's going to be permitted. And says the Gemara, but Tavai, both these teaching of the Shmuel are the kula, are saying a leniency. And with we have to say both leniency, although they're both in the laws of karfif. And okay, just say we rule it by karfif. You have to say both. Why? The Ashmin and halach Rabbi Yossi, how do you say halach is like Rabbi Yossi? Havamina, I would have thought to say that Shmuel would hold. Yeah, okay, we hold like Rabbi Yossi. It doesn't have to be squared, but adika shemer beis dira. But it has to be up until there's some type of a house over there, like Rabbi Yehuda Mabala. But regarding the length more than the width, okay, that way we know from Yossi that that's going to be permitted. That's why I had to say halach like Rabbi Kiva, to say that no, you don't need to have any person living over there. You can have any type of garden or park that's going to be okay. And also the Yeshmin halach Rabbi Kiva, how do we say halach like Rabbi Kiva? How do you mean I would have said, okay, the arch will cut and light. That, but okay, you hold like Rabbi Kiva that you don't have to have anyone dwelling over there, but it cannot be rectangular because Rabbi Kiva actually holds it has to be squared. Because Rabbi Kiva says it's 70 amas squared. That's why this is halach like Rabbi Yossi that no, you don't need it to be squared. We have both leniencies. Rectangular karfif is fine, and also the karfif does not need anything to permit it. It doesn't have to be even a hookah for deer. It doesn't have to be surrounded for residential purposes. Now, the Gemara starts a case that we had mentioned in the introduction that we're going to continue on the next stop regarding this halach of karfif, an enclosed area. A karfif just means an enclosed area that's not like for a house. So it's more than 2 sa, but shokif ladira. Really, we surrounded it for residential purposes. So either it's near a person's house or there's a house over there, but it's a huge estate basically. And it's very big. Now the case is like this. If nizra rubai, if most of the karfif, basically the enclosed area, the estate, if most of it you plant seeds over there. So what you did now is you nullified your dwelling over there. Because no one lives in a plantation. Meaning in the plantation itself, you don't live. So since the most of the plantation was planted with seeds, we're going to look at this area as a garden. V'asr, it's going to be forbidden to carry over there, even the part that wasn't planted, because it's batal to the right. This is a plantation, so it's not a hukaf ladira. That's not dira. You don't live in the wheat stalks. So since most of it was planted, it's considered as the right, and therefore it's going to be forbidden because it's more than Beis Hasayim, and we only let an area that was not Hokav Ladira up until Beis Hasayim, and not more than that.
So a house that has a shtickle garden in the yard, and it has Nizra in that area, I cannot walk
right,
there.
so that's the simple translation. That's what we're talking about. That a house might be different, but let's say, imagine Hokav Ladira is, let's say, the case that's simple to understand, let's say near your house, which you said, a garage is nest, so that's part of your Dira purposes that you could use. And that's what we're saying, yeah, it might be even a house. But just to simple understand, it's like, so that would usually be considered hukah l'dira. But yeah, if you plant the whole thing, it's not considered as a residential area. It's considered as your house might be open to that. It's considered a non-residential area. Because it's not.
In a 10-foot gate with regular.
Yeah, because it's exactly. This is the halacha they discuss by parks. If you have where the guards come.
You talk about a yuchid. Someone owns it, a private person owns it. Part of it
Yeah,
is,
but it's not. But it's a karfuf. It's a karfuf, and the karfuf is only allowed. It's no residential enclosure. Only lets you carry there if it's up to a basis time. Here it's more than that. So though it was enclosed for residential purposes, the moment you plant the most of it, it becomes a plantation, and that's not a residential thing. And therefore, you're not allowed to carry in there, and it nullifies even the part that's not planted over there. That's regarding planting. But let's say not to Ruba. Let's say the majority of it you plant trees. So trees will not nullify your dwelling because it's normal for a person to always relax and have shade in his trees. So even if most of it has trees, it's going to be like a courtyard. It's going to be permitted. That's the halacha that the Gemara says. Now the Gemara qualifies, and this is a havamina, and then on the next amud we'll say the maskana. Nizar rubai. So regarding this halacha, the majority of it planted. So remember when we read Rabbi Shua, he says like this: Lo yamar in Elo. We didn't say this that if you have over there that you planted seeds, that it's going to say that if most of it is planted, it's going to nullify the whole area, and it's going to be considered shalei hukah l'dir. Only if it's Jason basis sign. Only if that area that you planted is more than the area basis sign. So now you made that area of where you planted into a carmelis. Because a karfif that's more than 2 saw, that's not enclosed for residential purposes, is a carmelis. It's a rabbinically prohibited area to carry. Now that basically makes to say that now the second part of the field, which is not planted, it's a chutzner, because you're right, it's your house is there, it's your courtyard, that's breached, totally open to a carmelis. So therefore it's forbidden in the whole area, because now your courtyard is breached to a carmelis, because that part is more than 2 saw of non-residential enclosed area, which you can't carry rabbinically, so it's a carmelis. And now your chutzner, what do you mean breach? It's my courtyard, yeah, but once you plant, it's 2 different areas. That's shlei hukah l'dira, a carmelis, and this is your chutzner. Now it's totally breached to a forbidden area. Anytime you have an area breached to a forbidden area, it becomes usher. That's where we said halacha. I'll base the sign, but let's say the area where you planted the seeds is only 2 saw, which it's not for residential purposes, but in itself you're allowed to carry over there because not more than base sign. It's not a carmelis yet. So here also, mutter, it's going to be permitted to carry in the whole area, because although the place where you planted is called a karfaf, and the part which you didn't plant is called a chutzner, and they're breached one to the other because there's no wall between them, even so, they don't make it forbidden. Why? Since it's owned by one person, the way Rashi explains it, and it's only based on sign, so the 2 areas are not going to make a forbidden one on the other. Which the Gemara says is a little bit complicated here because we're talking about a different concept of parts, what's considered different areas. Says the Gemara, come on, who's this like? Is Krib Shimon. Shimon says that the domain of a karfaf, which is what we're discussing here in these dafim, and a chatzar, they don't make a forbidden one on the other, even if it's owned by 2 different people. It's not like we're in the Mishnah later enough Pites and Alf. That's what we'll discuss this at greater length. Shimon, he says, echad gag is where the roofs, vechet chatzar is where the courtyards, vechet karfif is where the enclosed areas. Rishus achasim. They're all considered as one domain to carry from one to the other, like Kalim Shashavas B'Toichan, the vessels that start off Shabbos inside of them, even if it's owned by many different people. But not from vessels that start off Shabbos in the courtyard, in a house, and then you took it out to your courtyard. Then actually you now take it out from the courtyard to the karfaf or to the roof, because the house and the karfaf are considered 2 different domains, even according to Shimon, even if it's owned by one person. But the chutzner and the karfaf themselves are considered the same area, and therefore it's permitted to go ahead and carry in this chutzner, even though it's breached to this karfaf, if it's only based on sign. Because the karfaf, if it's only based on sign, you're permitted to carry over there. Now, although that's a different domain than the chutzner, but Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold the chutzner and the karfaf are considered problematic as different domains to carry from one to the other. But if this place that was planted in your yard is more than based on sign, then it's not just a karfaf, then it's a carmelis. Oh, carmelis are a forbidden area. Now your chutzner is breached to this carmelis. Now you can't carry in your chutzner because now it's breached to a makam asala, and that makes that part also going to be forbidden. That's what the Gemara understands currently. The Gemara asks, wait a second, but Shimon Nami, this doesn't make sense. Even in Nizarubai, since this halacha that we're qualifying was said, that the majority of it was planted, havahu miuta, that makes the minority of the chutzner get into the dalman out. But the leila gabi ruba, it's nullified to the majority. It's like as if all of it was planted. So wait a second. If you're telling me the case is that it's based on Sayin, that then you'd be able to be carried, but that would make it now as if there's more than 2 Sasayim are planted. And you'll be forbidden, because although you surrounded the area to live over there, it's like it was not for residential purposes, because it's like all of it is a garden, and the garden is never hukav ladira, because no one lives in the garden. And why are we saying it's like all, with the case we start off, it was hukav ladira, but then you planted most of it. And then if you planted most of it, so we go based on the right. And then it batal baroy. Then the minority that you didn't plant is actually contributing to the part that did plant. And now even when it's based on, then you tell me that you would be able to be carrying in your chatzah because it's only open to a karfa. According to Shimon, it's not a problem. It's not true. You actually have now more than based on a planted area because of bittul. So then how can you say that would be permitted? The Gemara says, Eli, right, we have to amend the teaching. If we said it was like this, Hami'uta, on the second half of that teaching, we said only if Nizra Ruba, if most of it was planted, then it's going to be Asab. Hami'uta. If only minority of it was planted, then Shari. Then you would be able to carry in your chatzar. Oh, on that, Rav Huna Beredi Bishu, he says, Lo Iman, we didn't say it, Ela Deloy Hava, only if that little part that was planted is not based aside, is not considered, is not an area too soft. If the part that was planted, which is the minority, is not too soft, so it's not so significant to even consider it separate from the rest of the courtyard to have its own title. Avo based aside, but if let's say the area that you planted, even though it was a minority, was an area of two saw, now it gets its own title. It's called a karfa, which was not enclosed for residential purposes. So even though when it would be independent two saw, it would not be forbidden because it's not a karmelis yet. It's only two saw which you're allowed to carry in a karfa. Even though shalahu kav ladir, if it's not more than base samis, we said previously Rabbi Kiva. But here where it's breached to a chatzar and the chatzar is breached to the karfa, then we're going to say it's usher to carry from the karfa to the chatzar. Why? Because it's breached to a different area that makes it forbidden one on the other, and you cannot carry in either one. Why? Come on, who's that going like who says that they're considered two different domains? Like when your house opened to someone else's house, now you both forbidden. Because to carry from one to the other because you breached to a different area that's forbidden. Who is it that says two different domains? It's Karabanan, who they disagree with Rabbi Shimon later on the Pitzasim and They say each one's considered its own domain. So although there's no even dwellers over here, to make it forbidden on you because it's all your own property, still you're not allowed to carry from one to the other because there's considered two different domains which would be forbidden to carry from one to the other. That's what we were qualifying even by Nizra Rubai. But if it's only permitted when it's Nizra Mi'utai, when the minority is planted, we said then it's permitted, is only if that Nizra Mi'utai is not based aside. Because then it's not based aside, so then it's part of your house and part of your yard and part of your hukaf ladir part. But even if it's mi'utai, and the majority is what your regular yard, which is hukaf ladir purposes, it would still be forbidden to carry into the garden, because now the garden is called a karfaf when it's based aside. And the karfaf and the chatzar are two different areas according to Rabban, then you can't carry from one to the other. Another slightly different version, Rav Yirmiyah Midifni Masnakuli, he learns it leniently. He qualifies on the second half of the statement, like we just said in the previous interpretation. Yes, Hami'utu said that only minority but was planted with seeds, shari would be permitted. But now Rav Huna Beredi Bishu says, we didn't say this illa base sign. The first version said only if it's less than base sign, but base sign would be problematic. This version is saying you only let it when it's base sign, meaning even when the minority is base sign, not necessarily less, even though it's called a karfaf. But since the karfaf independently would be permitted to carry over there, now it's also going to be permitted, and it's not going to make it forbidden on your half of your chatzar. Because if there would be a partition between them, it would be permitted to carry from one to the other like a Shimon. Now that it's breached one to the other, it's not breached to a forbidden area. Because, as we're going to explain, it's going like Reb Shimon. Of a Yosim basis sign, but it's going that area, even the minority of it that's planted, is more than basis sign, now it becomes a karmas. The even Reb Shimon would agree that us is going to be forbidden, that you cannot carry from the chatzar to the karfaf if it's more than basis sign, which that considered shleihuk of ladir, because it's a garden. Here it's breached one to the other, so each one is breached to an area that's forbidden to it, so therefore it's going to be awesome. So Gemara says, come on, who's that slightly more lenient interpretation going like? It's going Reb Shimon, who he says that a karfaf and a chatzar are not different areas, you're allowed to carry from one to the other. So base sign itself would be permitted, it's only when it's a little bit more than base sign, then there would be a karmelis. A karmelis is an area that's forbidden to chatzar, then would be forbidden to carry from one to the other. Some of these we spoke about in today's daf, in Eruvin Daf Gimel, was we started with the Mishnah that additionally he said Rabbi Yehuda ben Mova says another stringency besides what he said by the laws of Pasibirois. He spoke about a new topic, a related topic, which is another inferior type of enclosure. Is regarding a garden and the karfaf, which are enclosed areas, not for, let's say, it's not a house itself, It's enclosed areas for utility, which if it's 70 amas squared and a little bit more, that is surrounded with a wall, it's a regularly enclosed area. You're allowed to carry inside of it. We have three machlekes regarding what the first machlekes in the Mishnah was regarding what else does it need. The Rabbi Yehuda Mebaba, this was the v'oid, another string. He was saying it has to have for residential purpose. It has to have the booth for the guard, whatever it is. Rabbi Yehuda, he says no, it's enough with just a pitch. Rabbi Kiva says it doesn't need anything. Now the Gemara pointed out that the Tanakama, which Rashi learns, the Tanakama Daf Yomi, who was telling Rabbi Yehuda you can't say Beis Hasayim for Pasi B'Rois because Beis Hasayim is only the halacha that we have for a karfaf. So it was mentioned over there, which they said basically this halacha of Beis Hasayim squared. So what Rabbi Kiva is saying different than the Tanakam over there. So the Gemara says is that davar mu'at, because where do we learn out this halacha of Beis Hasayim squared? It's from the Chatzar HaMishkan, which we said in the pasuk Chamishim b'Chamishim. What does mean Chamishim b'Chamishim? It's not Chamishim b'Chamishim. It's 100 by 50. Oh no! What we learn out from Chamishim b'Chamishim is take that 50 and by 50 and wrap it around the other. I mean, take the 50 and wrap it around the 50, which is going to give you 70 amis and 4 tfachim. And the difference between Rabbi Kiva and the Tanakama was not even 2/3 of a finger breadth. Like we went through the calculation, if you're letting 70 amas and 4 tfachim, there's going to be a little bit more that if you're going to say a full base of sign, that the Tanakama is going to be a little bit more than Rabbi Kiva. Or so the simple translation of the pasuk is what do I mean Chamishim b'Chamishim? It means put the Mishkan on the edge of the 50 amas because the first 50 amas should be empty, and then put the Mishkan over there. The second half of the Mishnah had a machlekes regarding which the Gemara ultimately amended, but first it was quoted. Rabbi Eliezer said that the length should not be more than the width, more than 1 amma. If it is, then you can't carry inside of it. The Gemara in the conclusion actually said, because we quoted in the Brisa, says no, it can't be more than double of the width. Now, so wait a second, isn't that the same thing as Rabbi Yisi? Yisi says it could be up until double. No, he said the difference is that Rabbi Eliezer holds you don't need to have the squaring off. Rabbi Yisi holds that initially you want it to be squared. So everyone agrees to the halacha that it could be double, and everyone agrees that it could be squared. The machlekes according to Rashi translates what's likatchila. Rabbi Yisi initially wants us to have it to be squared off, because that's what we have. We're learning a chamishim, we're creating a square. And Rabbi Eliezer said no, it doesn't have to be. Actually, the way Rashi makes it sound like is that likatchila I want it to be rectangular, which is the Mishkan itself. The chatzah was 100 by 50. So therefore, that's the machlekes between the two of them. Rabbi Eliezer, who disagrees regarding with the Reisha, he had 3 teachings that he heard from Rabbi Eliezer, which we'll discuss in the next dafim, that he said no, the halacha of a karfaf could be even, unlike everyone in the Reisha that said it's only up until base design. He says no, even till a base core, it could be very long, as long as you want it to be. Then the second halacha that he heard was that the people of a chatzar, if one guy forgot to join in the Eruv, so when he's mevatel his reshus, so then ultimately his house is forbidden for him, but for them it's permitted. On that they disagree with him and he says no, even for them it's forbidden from his house. Then the third halacha he heard is that akrablim, which is a type of a vine from the date palm, that he heard that you could use that on Pesach for the mar. And again, all these 3 halachas, he didn't find anyone that heard from the Rebbe the same thing that he heard. Now, why did it say in the Mishnah v'oid? So the Gemara explains because Rabbi Yehuda above in the previous Mishnah said another stringency regarding halacha of bein apasim, that it's only for a be'er of a rabbi. Now, Rabbi Yehuda, well, he also said 2 stringency in the laws of pasim. Why didn't he say v'oid? Even though it's not the same halacha, but Rabbi Yehuda above also is not the same halacha. One's by pasim, one's by karfuf. So because it's the Rabbanan interrupt him with, and it's not just that they interrupt him, they interrupt him with something else. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer in the Sech Sukkah, although the Rabbanan interrupt him, but it's on the same thing that he's talking about, he could continue saying v'oid, since it's on the same topic of the Suddis of how many you have to eat, and if you forget one on Sukkot. Shmuel said 2 leniencies, both are lukula, and we needed to say both of them in regards to the laws of karfaf. One was the halachas of Rabbi Yisi, to tell you that even if it's rectangular, it's going to be permitted, it doesn't have to be squared. And those said, like Rabbi Kiva, where you don't need to have anything, you don't have to have a shemer, you don't have to have anything, it doesn't have to be hukav ladir, it can be even surrounded by non-residential purposes. But then we ended off with an interesting case, which we'll discuss at greater length on the next daf. We had a karfaf, which is more than basis time, but it was hukav ladir, so it's like a regular property. It could be more than basis time. The problem is, if you planted most of it, so then it becomes like a garden, because that's the right. Now it's forbidden. But let's say you planted trees, or trees in residential areas, so then it's like a chutzah, and then it's going to be permitted. Now, in that halacha, the Gemara qualified, according to the Havamina, when you planted it, it's only if it's more than basis sign. But if it's only basis sign, then it would be permitted, even though it's the majority planted, because like Reb Shimon, who says that, okay, it's only Beis Hasayim, that's a karfaf. A karfaf and a chatzar are all one rishus. So it's not going to make it forbidden one on the other. A karfaf Beis Hasayim, Shalach Ladir is a permitted area. It's not more than Beis Hasayim. And the chatzar is really a hook of Ladira. So these are two permitted areas open because Rabbi Shimon holds Gagis, Chatzei, Tzor, Kevir is all one area. The Gemara asked, no, it doesn't make sense. Even according to Rabbi Shimon, since you tell me the majority of it was planted, the laws of bittul work, that now the miyut of the chatzar is actually bottled to the right. Now you have a karfaf more than Beis Hasayim. Even when it's Beis Hasayim, it's more than Beis Hasayim because the part that wasn't planted is bottled to that. It's like it was planted. So you actually have more than Beis Hasayim. Shalai huk of ladira. It according to Rabbi Shimon should be awesome. So the Gemara says you're right. We were qualifying the second half of the halacha. When the minority of it was planted, we said then this can be permitted, and that's what we were qualifying. We said we only said that only if it's not Beis Hasayim. But Beis Hasayim itself actually would be forbidden because we're going like Rabbanan, who hold that a karfaf, which is Beis Hasayim, is actually a forbidden area. It's different area than the chatzar, and therefore you'd not be able to carry from your chatzar to that area. A slightly different version, which was saying even more lenient, was saying no. We only said that's going to be permitted if it's Beis Hasayim, not less than Beis Hasayim, even Beis Hasayim, which is a karfaf. But if it's more than Beis Hasayim, that's going to be also because we're going like Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon would agree that when it's more, then it's considered a carmelis. Oh, a carmelis is considered rabbinic with forbidden area, then it would make the area next to it forbidden because your power, it's l'makam asala, then you wouldn't be able to carry from one to the other. Thank you to any time for hosting us.